Yanmass, Taldor, first week of autumn, 4718. Early in the morning, on the day after their bloody skirmish at the Broken Bridge River and their encounter with Grand Duchess Falspar, the companions said their goodbyes to Breatisa and her daughters, and sailed onwards. Only a few hours had passed when the first signs of Yanmass appeared on the horizon. Standing out from the flat lands of the Avon Plains, the city of Yanmass was constructed on a pair of hills, making it stand out even at a great distance. On the left side, the smaller of the two hills was steep and imposing, crowned by the bureaucratic heart of Yanmass. Here the manor of Baron Moston Custios and the city's gilded Commerce Hall stood as testaments to the wealth of Taldor's northwesternmost prefecture. The larger of the two hills, called Hedge Hill, stood out in stark contrast to this, with its ancient trees and manicured grounds, making it a unique tranquil green space amidst the bustling trade city. Below these hills a sea of red roofs and grey stone buildings filled the landscape, the architecture of opulent inns, ornate homes, and sturdy warehouses standing out against the rest of the Avon countryside's patchy brown shrub grasses that extended far and wide beyond the city walls. Yanmass wasn't just the capital of Avon, it was the only significant city in the prefecture. As the largest city close to the border with the Whistling Plains, it effectively abutted with the northern reach of the Kelishite Empire. It therefore served a critical role as a hub for trade with the Padishah Empire and beyond. Even from a distance, they could sense the energy of the place. The merchants arriving from across the plains, the caravans laden with goods from the east, and the city guard, known as the Fire Watch, keeping the peace alongside the elite Taldan horse cavalry. As the boat drew closer to the city, they also noted all the tents outside the weathered stone walls. Though it was late in the season and the sprawling tent city had shrunk, it still teemed with life, the remnants of the bustling marketplace that overflowed the walls of the city during the busy spring and summer months. Their river caravel pulled into the busy docks of the Coinside district, where the hustle and bustle of commerce was evident in the crowd of workers, sailors, and merchants going about their business. As the boat began to moor, a small figure with a bright, friendly smile appeared at the dock, his liveried attire marking him as being in the service of someone important.
"Oh, hello there," the halfling greeted with an enthusiastic wave. "I'm Gregory Hamble. I'm a footman to Baron Morstan Custios. You must be Baron Aurelius Betinos's company. I'm here to help show you around the city and get you settled. Your timing couldn't be better. There's a mercantile council meeting tomorrow. Normally city business is kept private, but as a representative of Princess Eutropia, you've been granted special admission."
As Martella had suggested, the city had been well informed of their arrival, and they were anticipated here. Aurelius and Diyanah exchanged a glance. No subtlety in Yanmass, apparently. Diyanah's eyes spoke volumes. "Another halfling, just like Amistios and Wasilica. Bet this one tries to slit our throats in our sleep." Aurelius ignored this and turned to the halfling. "Thank you, Gregory," Aurelius said, stepping out onto the dock. "We appreciate the welcome. We'll need to settle in and prepare for tomorrow. The council meeting sounds like an opportunity we can't miss." Greg grinned and gestured for them to follow. "Absolutely. Do you know which inn or tavern you'll be staying at in town?"
We had not planned that far ahead, honestly," said Aurelius. "What would you recommend?"
Greg furrowed his brow slightly.
"Well, I suppose that depends on your, situation. The nicest and most well-appointed inn is called the Gilded Baldachin, and it's not far from here, and situated just north of Gentry Hill. Of course, it's also the most expensive lodgings, by a fair margin, from all the others. If you're travelling on more modest means, I can recommend the Whistling Wyvern, down in the Bountiful district, which is kind of a new market district," explained the halfling, with a lot of gesticulating. "Well, relatively new," he added. "It's over a century old, actually. The outer walls haven't been moved in Yanmass for some time." "Oh," he said as a notion popped into his head, "and if you're really counting coppers, though I don't imagine that you are if you're the princess's delegation, there's a large inn outside the city walls as well. It doubles as a restaurant and coffee house, and it caters to Kelishite caravans who come to trade in town. I hear it's actually quite nice, considering the low price, if you don't mind consorting with that sort, of course."
Aurelius idly wondered if his half-Katheeran heritage was evident to the halfling or not. Either way, he had no intent of staying outside the city. "Give us a minute, Gregory." He pulled a quick meeting of the group. "What do we think?" he asked them discreetly. "I think we don't trust anything the halfling says," added Diyanah suspiciously. "Okay, noted," said Aurelius. "What do the people who don't have an irrational suspicion of halflings think?"
"I think we should split up," suggested Rankle. "That will allow us to hold some of our strength in reserve that our foes don't know about. The official delegation should be the 5 of us who are already known to Panavar. We should stay at the Fancy Inn, but we should have Anlel, Sepsinia, and Gerda stay at the Whistling Wyvern.
That doesn't sound fair at all, said Sepsinia. Why don't we get to stay at the nice place?
It's just tactical, said Rankle simply. I would much prefer to stay at the Wyvern than the Baldachin, added Gerda. I hate fancy sorts who put on all kinds of airs. That silly party in Casimir was the most uncomfortable experience of my life.
Well, I'm worried I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb and totally get robbed, suggested Sepsinia.
I thought you were looking for a bit of adventure. Anlel and I will keep you safe. We can buy you some less fancy clothes. You'll be fine, said Gerda.
Ooh, shopping does sound fun. What's my backstory? Asked Sepsinia of Gerda. Just a tough girl from the wrong side of the tracks who grew up with nothing but a pet pig to keep her company. Isn't that right, Miss Piggy?
Gerda rolled her eyes. Well, I'm suddenly having second thoughts.
Oh, we'll be all right, said Anlel, dragging the other two of them away. Rankle can call us via sending, or I can reach out via animal messenger. We'll find the Whistling Wyvern and catch up with you tomorrow after your council meeting. Anlel, Gerda, and Sepsinia then disappeared among the crowds at the docks. The others turned to Greg. The Gilded Bacchanal it is, said Diyanah. It's the Gilded Baldachin, corrected Greg. Yeah, sure, whatever. Lead the way, suspicious halfling. Greg gave him a curious look, and then began to lead them down the street. As they approached their destination, they were immediately struck by the inn's grandeur. The facade was an elegant blend of polished stone and carved wood, with intricate detailing work. Golden accents on the window frames and door handles had been polished to a fine gleam. It was also very large, 6 stories tall, towering over the other nearby buildings. Upon entering, they were greeted by the inn's owner, Mirisin Halvalor, a tall, poised woman with sharp features softened only by the welcoming smile she offered her guests. Her eyes were keen, missing nothing as she assessed each of them in turn with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen all manner of travelers through her doors. "Welcome to the Gilded Baldachin," she said, her voice smooth and warm. "You should have called ahead. I'm afraid we can no longer offer individual rooms, but the upper 3 stories are reserved as a single space intended for large parties. I have the 4th floor available right now, but I'm afraid the rate is 75 gold pieces even each night." "We'll take it," said Diyanah, throwing a pouch of money on the counter. Mirisin looked them over. "Ah, I see," she said with a sudden recognition. "You must be the princess's delegation. I should warn you, and I hope this won't be a problem, but the delegation from the Grand Strategos Pytherius is also staying with us as well. They have taken the top floor, our penthouse suite." Diyanah and Aurelius exchanged quick glances, then back at the proprietress. "So they're here now?" Aurelius asked. "Yes, they're actually having lunch in the common room. If this will cause any trouble, you can't stay here," she noted sternly. Give us a moment to check with the other delegation," said Aurelius nervously. "We'll be back in a moment." The party walked quietly down the hall to the common room. Diyanah's eyes widened angrily as he spotted the figure sitting at a table surrounded by a small entourage. He was a small man with fine features and a well-groomed goatee and mustache. He was wearing an exceedingly expensive fur coat made of white chimera pelt. "It's that bastard from the Palace of Birdsong Jubilee, Earl Yander Mercandus, the one I almost had a fight with over his stupid coat," said Diyanah, indicating the figure. "Of course it is," sighed Aurelius. "Well, look on the bright side. You obviously got under his skin with those comments about the snow leopard coat. He must have spent a small fortune on those chimera furs." "He's got a whole party with him," observed Marius. Indeed, Yander had several companions, 2 brawny mercenaries with an unsavory look, one Taldan military man with a hard countenance that made him look like he might be a second in command, a woman with short curly locks of black hair who was resting a long-necked lute by her seat, possibly a bard of sorts, and finally, Demi noted, a broadly muscled Kelid woman with silver hair wearing a chain shirt.
"Looks like he's got himself a whole party of ne'er-do-wells," agreed Rankle.
"We can stay somewhere else," suggested Aurelius.
"No, we should stay here," disagreed Rankle, "as they don't know we've arrived yet. That'll give us a chance to spy on them tonight, before they realize we're staying at the same inn. Let's get the room on the 4th floor, send the halfling on his way, and then figure out how to discreetly spy on our rivals."
They stepped quietly away from the common room, and Diyanah groaned when they were out of eyeline. "He's going to be at this council meeting, isn't he?" "If he's Pytherius's man, then I would say almost certainly," said Aurelius. "Well then, you all go and spy on him. I have to go out and get something before tomorrow." Aurelius almost laughed at him. "Are you going out to buy a fancy coat?" Diyanah looked serious as a dagger. "Yes, I'm going to buy a fancy coat. I'm going to spend an absurd amount of money. I want him to be seething with jealousy tomorrow."
With that, Diyanah strode out into the inn's entryway, where he found the halfling footman waiting patiently, and he said, "Gregory, with me. I need you to guide me to where the best tailors in the city are, preferably ones that deal in exotic animal pelts." "What about the Baron?" asked the halfling, looking over at Aurelius. "Won't he need anything else tonight?" "Nope," said Diyanah quickly. "Your priority is with me. Come now, we have no time to waste. Those shops will be closing soon, and I need a new coat immediately." Gregory raced to keep up with Diyanah as he strode out onto the streets of Yanmass. Aurelius approached the proprietress at the desk in the foyer and said, "We'll take the suite on the 4th floor. You won't have any trouble from us." "Very well, Baron Bettinos," she said, and she handed him the key. "See to it that things stay calm between your two parties, please. The country may be divided, but there'll be no divisions at the Gilded Baldachin. Are we clear?" "Crystal," he replied. Going up the stairs to the 4th floor suite, the opulence of the inn became even more apparent. The floors were covered in rich, deep-hued carpets that muffled their footsteps, and the walls were adorned with tapestries and paintings depicting various events from Taldor's storied past, including one magnificent illustration of the Giant's Bridge before it had become the Broken Bridge. Chandeliers of crystal and gold hung from the ceilings, casting a soft ambient glow in every part of the inn. Inside, the 4th floor had a common area for the party, and was subdivided into individual rooms, 6 in total, each with its own bed. The beds were enormous too, thickly padded affairs draped in silken canopies with sheets of the finest fabric, promising the most comfortable rest in all of the Avon prefecture.
"Well, Sepsinia's going to be really disappointed when she finds out where we're staying," said Marius, who, not for the first time since he had agreed to support Martella and Eutropia's cause, felt himself quite out of his element.
"Maybe they can join us later," said Rankle. "For now, we've done the right thing by not showing our full strength, especially since Yander and his party are staying here with us."
"I agree," said Aurelius. "Now, Rankle, you had this idea we might spy on Yander and his party. What did you have in mind?"
"We have a few options. I can turn myself invisible, as you know, and I believe you can cast invisibility as well. We can sneak in tonight and hear what they talk about," suggested Rankle.
"That's not a bad idea. But I don't know about you. Each casting of invisibility only gives me about 10 minutes of invisibility. That's not really long enough to wait for them to talk about the good stuff."
"That's true. We could always use invisibility as a backup solution in case conventional stealth fails, which is also an option. Even without invisibility, I'm naturally very stealthy."
"But not immune to magical detection."
"We could try scrying,"
suggested Rankle. Scrying detection is relatively easy, if they've anticipated that," said Aurelius. "And we could do scrying from anywhere. There's no great advantage to being in the hotel room 2 floors down if I'm just planning to use divination magic."
"All right, Mr. Contrarian," chided Rankle. "You got any good ideas?"
Aurelius thought deeply and looked around the room. "You think it's the same configuration 2 floors up?" asked the wizard.
"Don't see why it shouldn't be."
"I do have one idea. I know a spell called Mirror Hideaway. If they have a big mirror in their room too, like this one, it's pretty perfect. It's a spell that lasts for several hours, and it allows me to turn any mirror into an extra-dimensional space. I can bring others into the mirror with me as well, and we'll be able to pass the time if they're not doing anything too important."
"Interesting," said Rankle. "And you can see out the mirror, but they can't see in."
"Yes, precisely," said Aurelius. "Those in the mirror space can see and hear through it, as if it were an open window that is the same size and shape as the mirror. But creatures outside the extra-dimensional space can see only what is reflected in the mirror. Best of all, it's virtually undetectable, because spells can't be cast across the extra-dimensional interface, and divination spells would fail to detect us as well."
"Well, that sounds perfect," said Rankle. "Okay, Demi, I'd like to go with Aurelius to keep him safe while he does this. Can you disguise yourself as a maid, knock on the door, and offer them, I don't know, an evening turn-down service or something? When the door opens, we'll slip in invisibly, and Aurelius can move us into the mirror."
Demi indicated the envoy ring in her hand, and in a flash she appeared a demure maid, wearing the same garb as all of Mirison's staff. "I'll meet you back here in a moment," she said, "going to grab some essentials from the kitchen first." Marius had also been glancing around the room, assessing the layout.
"While you guys do that, I'm going to find a way onto the roof," said Marius. "I'll leave a knotted rope hanging by the western window, the one that can't be viewed from the main room. I'll make sure it's not visible. That way, when you finally decide to leave, you don't need to get them to open the door again. Just make your way to the window and climb out. Signal me with a missive and I'll pull you up."
"Okay," said Aurelius. "Guess we're actually doing this then." He pulled open his spellbook, studying the Mirror Hideaway spell. It was not one that he had cast very often.
Demi appeared at the door. "I'm all set," she said. "Ready when you are." She led Aurelius and Rankle up the stairs to the penthouse suite and knocked on the door. A gruff voice answered.
"What is it?"
it said. "Evening turn-down service," she announced with a chipper voice.
We don't need that,"
said the man on the other side. "Oh, that's a shame," Demi said brightly, "because I have some delicious hard toffee sweets I'm supposed to lay out on the pillows for the guests."
"Delicious sweets, you say?" said the man.
"Oh, yes, sir," she replied, keeping the upbeat tone in her voice.
"Well, I guess that sounds all right,"
he said. She could hear the man sliding the bolt on the door, and he opened it up. He was another mercenary, like the other two rough-looking warriors that were eating with the rest of Mercondus's party downstairs. Obviously this one had been left behind to keep watch over the room. As the door opened, Aurelius and Rankle snuck silently and invisibly into the room. "Since your room has already been serviced, shall I just give you the sweets then?" asked Demi kindly of the mercenary.
Yeah, that would be fine."
The man put out his hands. Demi reached into the pockets of her apron and pulled out a handful of hard sweets she had pilfered from the kitchen below.
Thank you, miss,"
said the man, and after he collected the sweets, he quickly closed the door behind her and bolted it shut. This was good. Earl Yander Mercondus and his crew had not yet returned to the room. Just the one guard was in the room, and he was happily popping Demi's caramel treats into his mouth. That afforded Aurelius and Rankle an opportunity to look around for a few minutes, while they were still invisible. They didn't have too long before the invisibility would wear off, though, and they didn't find anything too incriminating in their cursory investigation of the Earl's room. Then they reconvened by the mirror, before their 10 minutes were up, and then Aurelius cast his mirror hideaway spell and pulled himself and Rankle into the large mirror overlooking the common room.
"Interesting,"
said Rankle, looking around a perfectly white room with only a single mirror on the wall as decoration, a perfect replica of the one that they had just passed through.
"So it's just a blank void in here."
"Yep, that's how the spell works," noted Aurelius. "But here, to make our lives a little easier." Aurelius conjured a small clear cube and sat on it gingerly, and then he conjured one for Rankle as well. "Careful," he said. "Materials conjured by prestidigitation are very fragile, but it shouldn't break if you don't drop onto it." Then Aurelius conjured another one to serve as a table, and he pulled out a pack of cards from his back pocket. "To pass the time, while we wait for Yander and the others to return." Rankle nodded appreciatively.
"What's your game?"
the Dark Elf asked. "You know how to play Last Aslant?" asked Aurelius.
"Who doesn't?" said Rankle. "Start dealing, Aurelius. You really thought of everything, didn't you?"
Aurelius smiled. He was going to enjoy this little stakeout. "While we play," Aurelius began, his tone casual but curious, "can I ask you what it was like, growing up among the deep gnomes of the Darklands?" Rankle met Aurelius's gaze. His crimson eyes glinted with a mixture of old memories and lingering caution.
"The Darklands is a harsh place," he said quietly, "but particularly so for the lost tribes of the Ayendalar. Survival is a matter of cunning and having the right alliances. The deep gnomes of Dwimavel, the Drath-Nalar they call themselves, are an unusually kind people for the Darklands. Yet for all the safety Dwimavel provided, I was always looking over my shoulder. The tunnels, the darkness, the constant threat of creatures far worse than any surface dweller could imagine. It certainly shapes you."
Aurelius listened to him intently, picturing the subterranean world Rankle was describing.
"And you, Baron?"
Rankle asked, turning the conversation back to him.
"Your formative years were spent in Katheer, not in Taldor. You've mentioned your schooling before, but never in detail. What was it like growing up there?"
Aurelius reflected on his mother and sister in Katheer, and on the School of the Vale. Katheer, it's a land of extremes, endless sands with scorching days and freezing nights. But it's also a place of beauty, with golden dunes that stretch to the horizon and oases that are like jewels scattered across the deserts. I studied in Butraf, a bustling hub of trade and culture. Honestly, it may be hard to believe, but Killashite opulence can put the Taldan aristocracy to shame any day of the week, and magic was woven into the very fabric of society. The Katheeran mages are among the most skilled in the world, and I must admit I've been fortunate enough to study under some of the best." He paused as he recalled the sights and sounds of his youth, the scent of spices in the markets, the chants of mages during their rituals, the feel of ancient scrolls under his fingertips. "My father was wealthy, of course, but we lost much of that when Pytherius had him executed. Still, we had money enough in our exile, and my mother was always encouraging my studies. But there was always this pressure to succeed, to not just be good, but to be the best. I somehow always knew magic would be my path back to Taldor." Rankle nodded. He too understood the unspoken weight of expectations.
"Well, it seems your training paid off. This is a particularly neat way of spying you've devised here, and it looks like Yander is returning for the night."
Yander Mercandus had opened the door to his room and kicked off his boots. The rest of his companions followed him in. "Any trouble, Belloc?" he asked of the guard he had left behind to watch over the room.
"No, nothing," said Belloc.
No sign of Selim then either. Belloc shook his head in the negative. There was a knock at the door. A short Kelishite man with deep hooded eyes was at the door. "Speak of the devil," said Yander. "Does this mean Eutropia's new delegation has arrived in town today?"
Selim nodded. "Aye, they have indeed. I'm so sorry, Yander. The docks are very busy. I kept an eye, but I must have missed them. I asked around, and evidently they checked in here. They're on the 4th floor.
"They're here," said Yander with surprise. "Selim, you useless bastard. How could you not let me know before they checked in?"
"They slipped by me," said Selim defensively.
"I should never have trusted you to watch the docks," grumbled Yander. Yander turned to his bard. "Embla, help me detect magic, and cast detect scrying as well, for good measure." They checked around the room, but it seemed safe. "Well, good. Maybe they haven't realized we're here as well. Hopefully they prove as incompetent as the last agent she sent." Rankle and Aurelius exchanged meaningful glances. They continued to listen. The stern military man turned to Yander.
"And if they prove to be trouble, we'll send them off to investigate Ulvestikar Manor again."
"Careful," said Yander, glancing around nervously. "From here on out, I'm going to need you to be very circumspect about anything you say. Make no mistake, our enemies have arrived, and we can't get in the habit of underestimating them." Rankle and Aurelius continued to listen to Yander and his company talk for the next few hours, but little else of value was coming out of their discussion. They did, however, start to learn about who his company consisted of. Obviously there was Yander himself, who was the hereditary Earl of the Western Rushing Marches, a large swath of land along Taldor's swampy Moda prefecture. Then there was Yander's protege, the lute-playing bard Embla Hightune. There were 4 cutthroat mercenaries in his service, a Katheeran man named Selim, and 3 Taldans, including 2 men and a woman named Cardello, Belloc, and Viara. But the most impressive warriors in his retinue were a former captain in the Taldan phalanx, an older veteran tactician named Grammel Takiar, as well as the muscular Kelid woman with great axe, a Sarkorian based on her clan name, the powerful Hulgra Neverhome. Aurelius and Rankle waited for Yander's company to fall asleep, before casting invisibility spells and sneaking out of the mirror. They made their way to the knotted rope that Marius had left for them at the window. They eased open the window and climbed outside. To make the climb easier, Aurelius cast a featherfall spell which made them supernaturally light. Marius reeled them in. "Come on, you guys," he said. "I want to hear about Yander, and just wait until you see the crazy coat Diyanah bought." Yanmass, Taldor, first week of autumn, 4718. The next morning, the companions chose to skip the provided breakfast in the Baldachin's main hall that morning, and ate from their own provisions instead, hoping that in this way they might avoid meeting Yander and his party until the council meeting itself. When Gregory Hamble appeared to escort them to Commerce Hall, they were pleased to note that the other party had already left earlier that morning. Along the way, Gregory told them a little bit about the Mercantile Council. He was a gregarious and helpful sort, and seemed genuinely amiable, so the company mostly warmed to him, except of course Diyanah, who remained suspicious of the halfling's intentions. He noted that the 19-member Mercantile Council consisted of 5 principals and 14 associates who represented the wealthy interests of Yanmass. He also noted that one of the associate councillors, a banker named Rundle Navin, had gone missing a week ago, which could be related to the various troubles the town had been having. The city's baron, Moston Custios, had an executive seat, technically outside the confines of the council, but did tend to officiate council affairs. In fact, the companions were discussing the disposition of the Baron as they were approaching the opulent Commerce Hall, and one of the liveried soldiers at the entrance regretfully informed Gregory that the Baron was too ill to attend today's council meeting. Gregory turned to the others. "Well, that's a shame, but not too surprising," he said. "Baron Custios has been ill at home for many days now. I'm sure Lord Rudig Orton, the High Seat of the 5, will officiate instead." "I should also mention," said Gregory's friend in the guard, "the Mercantile Council is hosting another guest, an earl from the Moda prefecture." "Oh, they know about that too," noted the halfling footman. "Shall we enter?" "Lead on," said Aurelius. As the companions were led into the audience chamber of Yanmass's vibrant Commerce Hall, they were struck by the brightness of the room. The high, stained-glass windows allowed sunlight to pour in, casting vibrant colors across the walls and floors. The light danced across polished marble surfaces and intricate carvings that adorned the room. Several chandeliers not lit during the day, but decorated with reflective crystals, hung from the ceiling, their golden frames glinting in the sunlight. The centerpiece of the chamber was an immense oval table. It was surrounded by an array of chairs, each one reflecting the status of its occupant. At the head of the table was a throne-like chair, the Baron's seat, which had been left vacant in the Baron's absence. The other chairs did have occupants, however. Seated in the most ornate grouping of chairs were the 5 principals of the council. In the high seat sat the man that was presumably Lord Rudig Otten, dripping in ostentatious jewelry, lounging casually, his fingers absently playing with a jeweled ring. Next to him sat a half-elven woman, her well-tailored clothing accentuating her poised demeanor, the very embodiment of refined elegance. Across from her was a lean, bald man, his posture proud, wearing the regalia of a high priest of Abadar. His eyes, though calm, held a certain authority. A halfling woman was further down from him, her stature small, but her presence large. She sat with a serious expression and a furrowed brow, surveying the room with a shrewd gaze. Lastly, a narrow-faced human woman, her expression marked by worry, completed the quintet of principals. Gregory Hamble whispered to the companions, "You see before you Lord Rudig Orton, High Seat of the Mercantile Council. He made his vast wealth in the spice trade. The half-elf is Lady Amber Jubal, who is preeminent in the city's textile industry. She is an important exporter of clothing of all sorts. The bald man is Chief Enumerator Abron Palliator, the High Priest of the Church of Abadar in the city. The halfling is Lady Halliana Cobbin. She is naturally my favourite, and the only one of my kinsfolk to have ever sat on the Mercantile Council. She owns several large orchards and ranches in the outskirts of Yanmass. Her father was the chief manager for an heirless human aristocrat, who bequeathed both her lands and title to him when she died. And finally, the last woman you see is Lady Carmelia Rules, who deals primarily in armour, weapons, and equestrian gear. She holds a lucrative contract to supply our national cavalry, the Taldan Horse." Around the rest of the table, several other well-dressed individuals occupied less ostentatious chairs, their attention focused on the proceedings. Their clothing was fine, though not as extravagant as that of the principals, and though their positions around the table indicated their importance, they were clearly not the key players in the room. On the southern narrow end of the great oval table, no chairs had been laid. Instead, the table was overlooked by a viewing gallery. On the rare circumstances that Yanmass's citizens or special guests had been invited to attend council meetings, they could, from the gallery, see all the councillors present along the table. Seated in the viewing gallery, wearing his magnificent coat of spotted albino chimera fur, was the unmistakable face of Earl Yander Mercandus. Some of his entourage were present too, including the bard Embla, the Kelid Hulgra, his veteran Grammel, and 2 of his 4 mercenaries, the ones named Cardello and Viara. As soon as Aurelius saw him, he locked eyes with Yander. Yander immediately stood up angrily and addressed the council. "My lords of Yanmass, this is a travesty," he said. "This delegation of the princesses is known to me. I met them in Tandak Prefecture, and they are dreadful manipulators and scoundrels. Let it be known that in Tandak Prefecture they ousted both a count and a duke and replaced them with Eutropia's cronies. If they are allowed to operate in the city unchecked, they will do untold damage to your fine prefecture." "Earl Mercandus," said Lord Otten from the high seat, "the Mercantile Council will have dignity and decorum in the council hall. And we will kindly remind the Pytherius delegation that in the national matter of the succession, both Grand Duke Rengiana and the Prefecture of Avon at large remain undeclared in our support. We have more pressing local problems that take priority over national ones, and we welcome both your delegation and the princess's one on the condition that you are here to help and not to pick fights." Yander turned to Aurelius, his eyes smouldering with anger. Then Diyanah stepped out from behind the rest of the delegation. He was wearing a coat that flashed brightly in the well-illuminated room, fashioned from the scales of a golden dragon. "I see you've discarded your leopard skin since we last met. The chimera pelt is a fine improvement, of course, but what do you think of my new coat, Lord Mercandus?" said Diyanah, raising an eyebrow. "It was fashioned during the dragon plague, when even the noble metallic dragons turned on us. But few of the gold dragons succumbed to the rage, and only 2 had their hides retrieved by hunters. Its value is beyond reckoning." In truth, he had only spent a few thousand gold pieces on the coat, but he was loving the effect the sight of it was having on the Earl. A vein on Yander's forehead looked about to burst. "You shameless, ostentatious bastard," said the Earl, standing up to meet Diyanah's gaze. "There will be order in the council hall, I said Lord Otten, striking a gavel. "Baron Betternos, tell your man not to antagonize the Earl," instructed the high seat. "And Earl, comport yourself at once." Yander sat back down, but he was clearly fuming. Okay, let's give it a rest, Diyanah," said Aurelius. "We don't need to cause a ruckus before we've even had a chance to meet the council." Diyanah stepped back, but he kept a cocky stare aimed at Yander as he did so. Aurelius found some seating in the viewing gallery that put some distance between his party and Yander's.
"Thank you," said Lord Aughton, and he smacked the gavel a few more times. "I think we are assembled now. We may begin."
He stood up from his seat and looked both down the table and down at the guests in the gallery.
"Given Baron Custios's continued absence, I am calling this meeting to order in his stead. As we have stated, we know that much of Taldor is currently in political turmoil, but we have more pressing problems close to home. Yanmass suffers under the grip of several troubles, and our discussion today must confront these. First, terrible unsavory dreams haunt many of our citizens. Some of us here have had them. I understand that their cumulative effect has been crippling to morale and our economy. Second is the mystery of the Talden Horse Cavalry Regiment that is supposed to protect our city and has in large part vanished. This leads to the third issue, which is the rise of banditry on the eastern plains, Katheer bandits, specifically, preying upon good Talden trade.
All trade, to be frank, interjected Lady Carmelia Rawls, Kelishite and Talden alike.
Lord Aughton didn't respond to this remark, but continued, "I would also like to acknowledge the national concern, that Taldor currently sits without a Grand Prince in the capital. 2 claimants have emerged, the Grand Strategos Pytherius and the Princess Eutropia. Both have their supporters, but neither has a claim that is undisputed at this time. They have each sent a delegation to help our city in our time of need. They are Earl Leander Macondus of the Western Rushing Marches, a territory in the Moda Prefecture, and Baron Aurelius Betanos of Stakis, a barony in the Tandak Prefecture."
Earl Yander coughed slightly and stood up, adding, "I would just like it entered into the official record that the rightful successor, soon-to-be Grand Prince Maxillar Pytherius, saw fit to send at the head of his delegation a man of higher title and status than did the false princess." Aurelius buried his face in his hands at this remark, and he didn't have time to stop Diyanah from standing up and addressing the council. "And the princess's delegation would like it entered into the official record that the Earl Mercandus has been here for 6 weeks already, and so far as we can tell, he's just been twiddling his thumbs and not helping with the city's problems at all."
"What a pack of lies," declared Yander. "We have been making significant headway in our investigations, and we will not have a gang of crooks take credit for the fine work that we've already done." "Order! Order!" said Lord Aughton, slamming the gavel. "This is the last time I will allow the 2 delegations to argue with each other. We welcome the aid, of course, but one more antagonizing comment, and I will have the lot of you thrown out."
The priest of Abadar, Enumerator Palliator, cleared his throat. "High Chair, there's another thing I would like to add to our list of concerns. The encircling Bower Theatre has recently been purchased and is being renovated as a place of worship for a new faith. The Church of Twilight, it is being called. As head of the Abadaran faith, I've seen that good citizens are joining this mystery cult. Perhaps it's benign, but we can't ignore a new philosophy that is ensnaring many of our citizens in our times of trouble." "Religion ever reigns in your mind, Enumerator," said the Lady Amber Jubal, "but people are well known to turn to new faiths during times of trouble, and people aren't suffering from the cult as they are from our other concerns." Enumerator Palliator was visibly frustrated at being undercut in this fashion, and he cast an annoyed glance at her. The halfling woman sat up and added, "Our esteemed guest, Earl Yander Macondus and his team did question the cult leadership. They are not the source of our troubles. Our focus should be on finding the missing cavalry regiment and addressing the matter of Katheer banditry. So long as the trade suffers, Yanmass suffers, and we all suffer with it." Aurelius was immediately suspicious. "Chief Enumerator, my party and I will find the time to seek out and speak with the cult leadership as well." "So you see," said Earl Yander, standing up again, "already they are undercutting our work."
6 weeks of twiddling your thumbs, said Diyanah again.
6 weeks is a normal amount of time to investigate situations with this degree of complexity, as you shall see.
"Nonsense," said Marius, now standing up as well. "There is nothing we've heard here that can't be addressed with focus and hard work. You just wait and see, as we shall have all the city's matters solved in a week."
Aurelius glanced at Marius with surprise. He had expected such an outburst from Diyanah, but not from Marius. "A week!" cried Yander. "My lords, these fools have no concept of reality."
"Enough, enough," said Lord Aughton, slamming the gavel. "It's become quite clear we won't get anywhere at all in public discourse. I'm ordering us to separate into 4 smaller councils to discuss the respective matters of the hauntings, the missing cavalry, the Katheer banditry, and yes, the cult as well.
Lady Jubal can lead the first of these discussions, Lady Rules the matter of the missing cavalry, Lady Cobham the matter of the banditry, and finally Enumerator Palliator can share what he knows on the subject of the Church of Twilight, as this is of concern to him. The delegations and I shall move between the halls, but the Council Guard will ensure the Macondas and Betternos delegations are kept separate from each other for the rest of the day. I shall split my time between them. Now I call for a small recess."
"We're not done here,"
hissed Yander at Aurelius' party. "You can bet on that," replied Diyanah. The council guards pulled the two groups apart. As soon as they were in private, Aurelius found himself chastising the party. "Well, that went spectacularly badly," he bemoaned. "And Marius, what were you thinking? We'll have all your problems solved in a week? It took us months to just begin to address the various problems of the people of Marat County." "Well, that was a whole county, and this is just one city," said Marius sheepishly. "Also, Diyanah's kind of right. That Earl is very easy to dislike. I just got swept up in the whole rivalry thing." "We'll just have to show results fast," suggested Demi. "We'll speak to each of the principals in turn, get as much information out of them as we can, gather our allies, and then we can figure out how to split up to cover more ground and move more quickly." Rankle nodded in agreement with her.
"Let's not worry about the Earl for a moment. Let's just get our heads back on straight and focus on the problems."
The rest of the morning the companions spoke at length with each of the principals about the various troubles the town was having. From Lady Jubal they learned some disturbingly specific information about the plague of dreams that was affecting a lot of the citizenry, and this was apparently the ailment that had afflicted the Baron as well. The vivid nightmares being reported by the citizenry featured the dreamers being shamelessly propositioned by someone the dreamer knew and loved. In the dream, the two would kiss and caress, but the dreamer would become overcome with crippling hunger and start to take enormous bites from the flesh of the dreamer's would-be lover. Soon the dream became a horrible cannibalistic nightmare, from which the dreamer would awaken feeling ill, fatigued, and nauseous. The party also agreed it could not have been a coincidence that this city was plagued with nightmares, given that Panavar Lothide had already demonstrated his ability to affect the dreams of others. Lady Jubal also noted that a frantic citizen, a woman named Caradina Farkin, had accosted a few of the council members in the streets some days ago, claiming to know what force was behind the dreams. She was so angry and erratic that the councillors in question, associate councillors that the party did question afterwards but who had nothing of note to add, had just pushed her away. Lady Jubal wondered if she hadn't stumbled upon some genuine clues. From Ladies Cobham and Rawls, the party learned relatively little about what might have happened to the missing Taldan cavalry regiments, nor of what might have spurred the increased Katheeran banditry, except perhaps opportunism. One small rumour that Cobham shared was that a figure wearing a cavalry uniform had been spotted near Hedge Hill, suggesting a possible deserter was hiding out near there. Finally they spoke with Enumerator Palliator. He spoke guardedly to Aurelius's company at first, explaining that the Twilight Church had done nothing untoward so far, but that he was uncomfortable with the public perception, likely originated by the cult itself, that the Church of Twilight was somehow an offshoot of the Church of Abadar. He certainly didn't believe that to be the case, and wondered whether the cult was hiding something more sinister. Marius in particular, as an Abadaran faithful himself, moved Palliator with his usual sincerity, and before the end of the conversation Palliator encouraged them to meet with him later that day at his temple, where he felt he could speak more freely. Finally they shared some words with the High Chair, Lord Aughton himself. Although he had presented himself and the council as dutifully neutral in the matter of succession as he could, in private discussion Lord Aughton made little attempt to disguise his own support for the Imperialist faction. Interestingly, though, he did point out to Aurelius, however, that it was those among the city who would be considered aligned with Eutropia's Loyalist faction that had suffered more than the Imperialists in recent events. He opined that the ill Baron Custios, for example, had leanings of a Loyalist nature. The missing banker, Rundle Navin, was also an outspoken Loyalist, and even the Katheeran bandits appeared to have been targeting merchants with Loyalist leanings the most. Finally, Aurelius asked if there were any other leads he might share worth following up on, and almost as an afterthought, Lord Aughton noted that there was a new restaurant in town, a place called Summaries. It could be a complete coincidence, he noted, but it had become very popular very quickly, and it opened almost exactly the same time that the troubled dreams had begun in the city. It was mid-afternoon by the time the party left Commerce Hall to begin their investigation. By this time they had various leads to follow up on: the meeting invitation at the Church of Abadar, the defector of Hedge Hill, the interviewing of the private citizen Miss Farkin, and the Savory's restaurant. The work, it seemed, had only just begun. End of chapter. All right, thank you so much for watching. You've just watched Season 3, Episode 3 of my Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown series. Welcome to Yanmass. Our heroes finally reach Yanmass and the Avon Prefecture in this episode. This is an episode in essentially two parts. My heroes arrive in Yanmass. They decide which hotel they're going to stay at. It turns out to be the same hotel that our old friend Earl Yander Mercandus is staying at. And then, after doing a little bit of spying on Yander and his team of ne'er-do-wells, the team then goes to the Mercantile Council and kind of gets debriefed. We have another social encounter where the players have a chance to basically collect clues as to what might be going on in the city so that they can then go about and investigate the various things that are going wrong in the city. This was a really fun series of game sessions that we played, and I think part of the reason these sessions are so fun and memorable is because of the intense rivalry that the party felt with Yanmass's crew, or with Earl Yander Mercandus's crew, rather. And part of that was fueled by the pretty hilarious encounter that Diyanah and Yander had all the way back in the beginning of Chapter 2, where Diyanah had made fun of his coat, and then it turned out that he had purchased a different coat, an even fancier coat, at the start of this episode, and or by the time he moved on to Yanmass. And of course, to show him up, Diyanah decided to go out and spend a bunch of money on an even fancier coat. And I don't know how other groups have played the Mercantile Council meeting in other game groups, other sessions have run that. I don't know if it was more calm. It was sheer chaos. The groups kept arguing with each other. The Mercantile Council couldn't keep them in line. That also drove that great moment where essentially Marius stood up and said, "We'll have all your city's problems solved in a week," which kind of came out of nowhere, and it was pretty hysterical. And it did this wonderful thing of creating urgency, where it's this sort of artificial urgency. They suddenly really needed to solve everything in a week because they had proclaimed that they could. And so all of a sudden, everything else that happens in Yanmass is frantic. They're desperate to investigate everything, do everything. They're a little more conservative with their use of spells because they feel like they can't rest. And that was wonderful because that came entirely from the players. So that was a ton of fun. The other thing that happened in this episode, obviously, is that the party discovers that Yander is staying at the same hotel that they're staying at. And that also leads to this pretty cool sequence where Rankle and Aurelius get to spend some time, just the two of them together, and they end up spying on Yander's crew. And Yander's crew is great because they essentially have a whole villain party that you get to play with. And I feel like not enough adventures do this, where they introduce they're not evil parallels to our player characters because they're a random selection of different classes and types, but they each have slightly different proficiencies, and the players already know that they're going to come into conflict with them at some point, and so they're trying to sort of figure out, what capabilities do they have and how can they effectively combat them. And the way they ultimately collide with this group ends up being quite different from the way that you'd expect, as we'll get to in a later episode. But at this point, we were just having tons of fun with Yander and the villains, and hopefully they end up being as fun for any group that runs this particular adventure path. We certainly enjoyed it. Kicked off our book 3 in the right way, I think. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this and my other adventure path recaps. If you enjoyed this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe, do all the good things. I'll see you next week.